Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a safe place for leading with your heart. Hey, thanks for being here. You, Me, Empathy is the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective, a collaborative mental health community designed to empower each of us to grow our capacity for empathy, vulnerability, and emotional wayfinding. Just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No one is just a silly boy with a feely heart. You can support the show by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts, following us on social media at Yumi Empathy and Feely Human, and joining the Feely Human Collective community at feelyhuman.co. And now your host, Known Wells.
Hello, Feely Humans. Welcome to another episode of You, Me, Empathy. My name is Known Wells. This is episode 150 on Hope is Healing with Dr. Dyona Augustin. Dyona and I explore the importance of discomfort, Dyona's childhood curiosity, living an examined life, emotions as smoke detectors, and why hope is healing. We also talk about Dyona's anxiety and depression in her teen years. We talk about race and privilege. We talk about men and feelings. We talk about implicit bias. We talk about Dyona's Christianity and how that plays a role in her mental health. We talk about so many things in this episode. Really, really loved this chat. Dyona is doing amazing work. She's a psychologist, a doctor. That's why she has the doctor in her name. Very fancy. And she does a YouTube show called Mental Health Sisters with her actual sister. It's great. You should check it out. Links to that are in the show notes for this episode. Before we get to the episode, though, I wanted to remind you that Yumi Empathy is run by me. Feely Human is run by me. It's me, and sometimes I need help and support. And so one easy way to do that is to leave a rating and review for Yumi Empathy in Apple Podcasts. 5 stars is a wonderful number, but, be honest. If you like the show, please leave a rating and review. It truly does help out the podcast. If you want to support me and the work I do with Feely Human, you can sign up for my free workshop, Feely Human 101 at feelyhuman.co. Sign up for the newsletter, also at feelyhuman.co. And there are a bunch of other ways to support me and my work if you go to feelyhuman.co/support. All right. In addition to that, I wanted to remind you, so today is, it's November. Happy November. Hopefully you're staying cozy and, I'm in Southern California and it's hot, so climate change is a thing, you guys. But for folks in chillier areas of the country or the world, I hope you're staying cozy. You have a cup of tea, maybe some cookies, and you're wearing a cozy sweater, maybe some moccasins or something, a robe. I don't know. I just hope you're staying cozy and warm. Tomorrow's election day here in the United States. Anxiety has been high in me, probably a lot of you as well. We're also living in a pandemic. It's weird and anxious times, and so I wanted to invite you on this Tuesday, tomorrow on Election Day at 3:30 Pacific Time, 3:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 6:30 Eastern Time. I'm going to hold a Zoom for feelings, for joy, and for connection, just to hang out, talk, do an emotional check-in, laugh, cry, whatever we want to do. We can do it. So come see me and my other Feely Human friends. Everyone is welcome, truly. If you want to join, let me know. Just DM me on Instagram at Feely Human or at Yumi Empathy and give me your email address and let me know you want to be part of the Zoom on Tuesday, tomorrow. I would love to see you there. No pressure, though. sincerely, no pressure. It's we're all in this together, and if you want to come and you don't want to show your face, that's cool too. You can come and just listen if that makes you feel better. But if you are feeling some anxiety about Election Day, I know I am, and you want to come and just kind of, I don't know, have a little reprieve and a little break from that with some Feely Human friends and feel a little less alone, you can do that. Again, just DM me your email address. I'll share a post about it on Instagram shortly as well. But yeah, that's at 3:30 Pacific time on Tuesday, tomorrow. Would love to see you on Zoom. The other thing I wanted to mention before we get to the episode is on November 18th this month at, what time is it at? It's at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time. I'm doing a Med Circle live. I'm doing a live YouTube interview chat with Kyle from Med Circle. I just recently did a Med Circle chat. You can look that up on YouTube, Med Circle, MEDCIRCLE. But this one on November 18th at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time is all about what it's like to survive anorexia. So I'll be talking about my experience with my eating disorder and what that was like and what I did to kind of work through that and all of that stuff. And it's live, and so it's going to be live on YouTube. So if you want to come and ask questions, I will love it. I would love to see some friendly faces and names in the YouTube audience, because as you guys know, YouTube can sometimes be a difficult place, to say the least. So I would love to just spread that YouTube comments page with so much joy and feely humanness. So I would love to see you there. Again, that's November 18th at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time. There is a page to register. I will link that in the show notes for this episode. I'll also share it. It'll be in the bio. If you go to my Linktree link in my Instagram profile, You Me Empathy, you can register there as well. Okay, I think that's it. I hope you're doing well. Hope your Halloween was spooky and, fun and safe. And I love you all. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And make sure to subscribe, leave ratings and reviews. You're the best. Thank you. I hope you enjoy this episode with Dr. Dyona Augustin about hope is healing. Enjoy.
La la la, you, me, empathy, yeah, la la la.
Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective. On this show, we explore the struggles, the triumphs, the brights and the darks we face as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You Me Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our mental health, our neuroses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight, so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being feely humans. You Me Empathy is a safe, friendly space designed to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, I am here with psychologist, fosterer of hope, and co-creator of the Mental Health Sisters, Dr. Dyona Augustin. Hello, Dyona.
Hi, Noan. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to join the podcast and talk about our feelings and all that good stuff.
Yay, feelings. Let's feel together.
Right?
Indeed. Well, we always kick off the show, Dyona, talking about, well, just having an emotional check-in. How are you feeling right now, and how has your week been?
So far, I'm feeling good. I actually think that with regards to what's going on right now with the pandemic and the climate that we're in, it's taken some adjusting, but I actually think that right now I'm in a good place.
That's good. What do you account for that? Like what has contributed to that feeling of being in a good place?
I think it's a mix of things. I think that I have a good social support system. So, for example, my siblings, my parents, my friends. I also think that because of my psych background, I kind of know what to do when I have like those negative thoughts or negative feelings that come up. And then, of course, my religious background also plays a role in terms of helping me to adapt to tough circumstances.
Nice. That's
Mhm.
great. It's so yeah, I mean, I keep having conversations, and it feels like, when am I going to record an episode of the podcast where we're not in a pandemic? But
Yes.
it just seems like
It
this is
keeps
what's
going on and
happening.
on.
Yeah, exactly. So I keep talking to people, and it's this feeling of like, okay, everything's new.
Hmm.
Let's find the things that anchor us. And for you, it sounds like, your social support systems, your faith. Those
Hmm.
are, obviously important things.
Yes, I like the word you used too, anchor. I
Mm.
didn't think about it in that way, but that is a very apt description.
Yeah. Yeah, because it feels like when we are faced with new things and
Hmm.
change, it feels like we're not anchored. It feels like we're untethered and
Yes.
floating off, and like a balloon just bashing into the trees or whatever.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
very true, and I actually think too. Sometimes, like speaking for myself, one of the things that I used to struggle with was anxiety. So I
Mm.
like to control things. So when something
Yes.
like this happens, it can really throw you, in a loop just because you're not expecting it and you can't control it.
Yes. I mean, control and anxiety seem to go hand in hand. I
They
know that.
do.
Yeah, I know that very well.
They do.
Yeah. How are you dealing with the current climate in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, social and racial justice, that being sort of at the forefront of a lot of important conversations,
Mhm.
obviously.
I think that for me, it's actually made me a little sad thinking that in 2020 we're still here.
Yeah.
I remember growing up as a young child. I went to a private school. We learned about Black history. And you would think that since these things happened in like the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, by 2020, we would have it all figured out. It's sad to me that that is not the case. So even though the movement and the climate that we're currently in is tough, I think it's a good thing that we're having these conversations and that we are getting to a point where we can call out racism, prejudice, and discrimination when we see it and not feel like as if we're the only ones who see it because that makes us think that we're the crazy ones. So I
Right.
actually think there's a lot of good coming out of, this time that we're in.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And
Mhm.
it's like, if I, as a person of immense privilege, being a white male,
Mhm.
middle class person, uh, I need to be sort of challenging myself in these ways, and talking about these things as well, and reminding my audience, right, that like these things are important, and even more so, like, this thing has an impact on mental health, right?
Mhm.
And we need to recognize that, and find a way to um, move the needle in ways that is going to be uncomfortable. But
Yes.
I always think that, like, there's so much enrichment, and
Mhm.
learning and important sort of perspective and bias breaking down in the discomfort.
Yeah. And I actually think the word that you use there, discomfort, not only with regards to racial issues, but honestly, isn't that what feelings are all about? I
Oh
think a lot
yeah,
of us, we actually struggle to accept that not only are we going to have those positive feelings and emotions, such as happiness, joy, excitement, but that we're also going to have the negative ones and to accept that those are a part of us. So when it
yes,
comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, the police brutality and all of these different things, we're going to have tough conversations and we may feel uncomfortable. That could be anger, frustration, disappointment, guilt, shame, whatever it is. And we have to accept those things. They are a part of us. And then ask ourselves, what do I need to change right now? Is it the way that I think, the way that I talk? What do I have to address so that I get to the bottom of this so that I can move forward?
yeah, yeah.
Mhm,
I've been I've been reading a number of books, and the most recent one is
mhm,
So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijuema. I don't know
mhm.
how to pronounce her last name, but
It's okay.
it's wonderful. And there's a moment in early on in the book where she talks about she goes to she lives in Seattle, right? And she's feeling like disconnected from her culture, from her people, from other people of color, right? And so
Mhm,
she joins this like Facebook group that is people of color in the Seattle area, and they go and like have a picnic on a on a rare sunny Seattle day, and they go to this park, and it's great and it's feeling great. And then there's a moment where these two black guys who are playing basketball, right? And they come
mhm.
over and they say, what's going on here? Can we join you? And then she talks about the feeling of like, um, of discomfort in that moment of like,
Mm,
are these like, so what she recognizes after that fact is like, there's even there's so many layers of like privilege, right? And like
mhm,
she was dealing and sort of assessing and try to unlearning or unpacking the privilege that maybe she had in certain ways, where she got a college degree and these things,
mhm.
and it makes me think and continue to think about my immense privilege. And there's so many layers of it that
Yes.
gives me sort of um, a step ahead on so many different people in so many different ways. And addressing those things is deeply human and empathetic, right? Like
Mhm,
thinking in
mhm.
that way is about empathy. It's about like, because empathy is about, it's not easy, right?
No,
It's about the
definitely not.
discomfort, right? It's about like
Mhm,
willing to our willingness to look and be
mhm.
curious and to break down our implicit and explicit biases, right?
Yes.
And I don't know. Lately, I've just been sort of immersing my sort of thoughts around those things, and it's such a important mental health piece. I
Mhm.
think
It
Sorry,
it
I'm blabbering.
definitely is. No, it's okay. But what I was going to add is I think that empathy, of course, as a psychologist, that's something that basically to be a good psychologist you have to have empathy, and it's
Mm,
all about putting yourself in that person's shoes, seeing the world the way that they do, feeling what they're feeling. And I think that when we talk about the concept of privilege, people who have privilege can be very tone deaf or ignorant to it. So a
yeah,
lot of times they don't even recognize that they have it because they've always had it. It's not like something that you were given,
sure.
when you were 10 years old and you were a kid and you understood. It's more of you're born with it. So it becomes a part of you that you're not even aware of. So I
Right.
like the point that you made about the young woman who found herself kind of checking her privilege, asking herself certain questions, And I think it's something that we all need to learn to do because those implicit biases are real, whether we
Hmm.
want to acknowledge them or not. So it's all about having those tough conversations, asking questions. And then I like what you said about how you already went and you started reading this book. We each have to do the work. We cannot wait on someone else to do the work for us or to just, tell us what to do. Actually go out, do the research to learn more so that you can figure out how can I address the question of privilege and what can I do to empathize with those people around me who may not necessarily look just like me or sound just like me, but at the end of the day, we're all human.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And hearing you say that makes me think about, there's so much in life that is, um, just taken for granted, right? It's just,
Yep.
this is the way it is,
Mhm.
but that's not right. Like,
No.
what is right is curiosity, and
Mhm.
what is right is understanding how we are born into systems, right? And
Mhm.
these systems are
Mhm.
complex, and these systems benefit some and hurt others, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
there's so much nuance and complexity to that. And a life unexamined is not a life in my mind. A life
Mhm.
needs to be examined again and again and again, and this is just part of that.
Mhm.
Whether it's our mental health, whether it's our relationship to equity principles and racial justice, like the important thing is to examine, right,
Yeah.
and to check in with yourself and unpack and unlearn and learn and unlearn again.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
I was actually going to comment when you said an unexamined life isn't a life. I would actually add it is a life, but it's a boring one. It's
There we
like the
go.
difference between, watching black and white television and watching high def color. So I
Yeah.
actually think people, not necessarily, just in our generation, but maybe in our parents' generation or our grandparents or great grandparents' generation, I think a lot of them went through life not necessarily examining, those types of things, or maybe they examined some things, but not necessarily the racial issues. And diversity adds to our life. I think that a lot of times in certain cultures or people from certain backgrounds, diversity is seen as a negative, but in reality, it is a positive. It adds something unique, something different. So I completely agree. It is important for us to examine our lives, in multiple ways, multiple points in time, and all it does is enrich as
Yep.
opposed to taking away.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So speaking of like being a person who examines, a person who has this curiosity to learn, to challenge yourself, to unpack these biases,
Hmm.
was that the type of person you were as a kid growing up?
Oh, definitely. I actually remember there was a point in time my family had a guy who was renting a room from us, and he was kind of like the fun uncle, always playing games, always bringing us little treats. And I asked so many questions, and one day he told me, curiosity killed the cat. And I said, well, thank goodness I'm not a cat then. But I was
Ah,
just
yes.
always asking questions. I love to learn. I love to learn about new people, new things, try new food, travel to different places. That's me. I love that.
Why do you think you were that way from as early as a kid? Did you have inspirations, in your family that sort of inspired that for you?
Good question. I honestly, I don't think I've ever really thought about it in that way. I
Hmm.
guess I just figured I was a curious kid. But I mean, if I'm thinking of my family, I know that everyone in my family, they're lifelong learners. So I
Hmm.
think that might be something that I got from them where I always want to know. And it's like I'll ask one question, get an answer, and then I have another follow up question. So I think that's probably something that is just, partial to the Augustin family, but also many other families out there.
Yeah. When you say lifelong learners, like what is
Mhm.
that? What does that look like practically?
So I think that in Western cultures, especially when we think of learning, we think of academics, we think of, good grades, high school diploma, college degree, and so on and so forth. When I use the term lifelong learners, I'm saying that you enjoy learning, period, at every step in your life. So it can be in the academic world, it can be occupationally, it can be socially when you interact with your friends. Like, I always want to learn more, and it shows up in many different ways.
Yeah.
Hmm.
How was there a point at which this curiosity um, bumped up against your own mental health? And at what point did that happen? And by that I mean like,
Hmm.
at what point did you realize, oh, I have mental health? That's a thing.
Let's see. At what point did I realize that I had mental health? I actually think it was probably college. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel kind of weird saying that, but I don't think I really necessarily thought about mental health in that way. But it was when I got into college and I took an intro to psych course. I think that was the first real time that I thought about my mental health. And then, even when I started to kind of learn about different concepts like depression, anxiety, personality disorders, and so on and so forth, that is the first time that I can remember being able to put a name to some of the things that I used to feel as a teenager. So,
Mm.
for example, one of the things that I struggled with growing up was anxiety. And I think it's partially related to me asking a lot of questions and being very future oriented. So
I
I would
see.
ask a question and then I would get the answer. And my mind was already working on what does this mean for me, a month from now, a year from now. So I think that that was the first time that I noticed that I actually struggled with anxiety as a teenager. And then even when I was in middle to maybe early high school, I would say I had some depressive symptoms, even though I didn't necessarily recognize it. So in
Right.
that sense, I was a late bloomer in that I didn't think about mental health until college.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way, and
Hmm.
I think a lot of people are like that,
Hmm.
because there's this. I mean, I know for me, and I'm wondering if there's a part of this for you, but for me, it was like growing up in an environment where like it didn't feel safe to like even go there, right?
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
once I got sort of out of the house and
Hmm.
started, you know, maybe suffering the consequences of like decades of sort of that,
Hmm.
not, the ignoring or repressing, whatever it may
Yes.
be. Yeah, that's when you had like, the floodgates opened, right?
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought up that point. I do think that culture and religion played a role, at least for me.
Hmm.
So, for example, in my family, I was actually raised in a Christian household. My dad was actually a pastor. So, we were very closely involved with the church. So, I think that sometimes when I brought up certain things with regards to negative emotions or feelings, um, Christianity was kind of used as a coping skill. And that isn't to say that it's not a good one, but sometimes it felt like as if, you know what, this is something that you just need to pray about as opposed to just talking it out. So I think that that
Interesting.
was one thing that led me to kind of repress my feelings a little bit. And then in terms of culture, I said my family was from the Caribbean. Specifically, my parents are from Haiti, and they are a very strong, hardy people. So I can remember sometimes I was the type of person who would cry, and sometimes I would get people asking me, "What are you crying for?" you know
Hmm.
so it's like you're already feeling bad, which is what led you to cry in the first place, and then when you cry you kind of get the third degree. So I think
Right.
that those things together kind of made me feel like as if I have to be, quote unquote strong, I can't necessarily show the quote unquote weaker emotions. I have to put on a brave face. And that was something that I did not pick up on until I was significantly older.
Yeah, I mean, I relate to that immensely.
Hmm.
How did, like, when you did, like, experience that first class and you started learning about these things, and then you looked back, what was that? How did that feel?
I would say it was bittersweet in the
Hmm.
sense that I was glad to have that information. That class was what kind of spurred me on to go into psychology because I felt empowered to know that not only my emotions and feelings are normal, but that I can actually, use specific skills and techniques to actually go farther and grow and learn and do better. And then, with regards to looking back on my upbringing, I think what it really made me do was recognize that, parents are human, so they're not perfect. I think that they did the best that they could. I think that they stood up for, their cultural norms. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think that every single thing that they said and did, it was the best way when it comes to normalizing human emotions.
Hmm. Are
Mhm.
your parents still around?
Yes, they are.
How are they today with that stuff? Are they still kind of stoic in their approach?
I would say there's been some growth, but I don't feel like as if it's something that is going to um I guess how could I say this? I think the cultural impact is huge.
Hmm.
So, one of the things, even when I see clients for therapy, I'll always ask them when they talk about a specific problem, I'll say, how old are you? And if they say, I'm 30, I'll say, you've had 30 years to get like this. So, it's not something that you're going to unlearn in one day. So I do think they've made progress in terms of not being quite as stoic, but I don't necessarily think they'll ever get to a point where, they are touchy feely humans who are always in touch with their emotions. I think sometimes they need someone else to bring it to their awareness before they recognize what's going on.
Yeah, that's a
Hmm.
really important perspective. I didn't think of it in that way in terms of, like,
Hmm.
you've had 30 years and it
Yes.
takes, it takes a while to unlearn that, because it's like,
Hmm.
as you know, as a psychologist, all of this stuff is it's baked into our bodies, our
Yes.
minds, our hearts,
Yes. Hmm.
trauma, all of it we hold so deep, and it
Hmm.
can arrest us.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. I actually think that's one of the things that I've noticed sometimes when I work with clients who did suppress their emotions, especially if they had like a trauma history of any kind, you really do get stuck. And the person oftentimes doesn't recognize it until you bring it to their awareness. So,
Hmm.
for example, I'll see a lot of clients who they can't be angry. I'll ask them, what did you feel when your partner betrayed you? Or what did you feel when your friend said this to you? Oh, I felt, annoyed. And I'm
Hmm.
like, is that it? And you can tell there's more there, but they can't even allow themselves to admit, I actually felt angry, or I
Hmm.
actually felt mad, or I actually felt furious. So when I'm dealing with people like that, and this is something I even had to tell myself because I also struggled with negative emotions, but especially anger. I had to kind of remind myself that our emotions are like the smoke detector in our body. They let
I
us
love
know
that.
that something is wrong. So, just like when the smoke detector in your house goes off, you don't grab a bat and beat it into submission. You actually walk around your house to figure out what's going on. Did I leave something on the stove? Is there a fire so that I can address it? Same thing goes for our negative emotions, whether it's a hate, whether it's anger, whether it's rage, whether it's disappointment, whether it's disgust. We have to get to a point where we ask ourselves, what led to that or what exacerbated that? addressing whatever it was, whether internally and externally, accepting that we do have those negative emotions, and then figuring out what steps can we take to address the source.
Yeah, and sometimes that sometimes there is a fire, and sometimes there isn't. Right? It's
That's
sometimes
true too.
it's just a thing that pops up for reasons that we really need to be curious about because it's going to take some
Yes.
digging.
Yes, and I'm glad that you made that distinction. You said sometimes there is a fire, sometimes there isn't. I would say that for someone like myself who struggled with anxiety, I was perceiving certain situations to be fires, even though
Right.
they were not.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that anyone who has struggled with anxiety can attest to. You have a stressor, you think it is the end of the world until you get past it, at which point you're like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I anticipated it to be. So it's definitely important to distinguish between whether there is a fire or whether there isn't. And if there isn't, figuring out what led to the reaction that you had.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Sounds like there's a fire going on behind you.
I actually hear it, but I'm not sure where it's coming from. Oh God, I think someone set it's so funny we're talking about this. I think someone set off the smoke detector.
Oh my goodness. Sweet serendipity.
The irony.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
Oh my gosh.
So, Diona, can you talk to me a little bit
Mhm.
about, after you take that first psychology class and
Mhm.
you get this bug for like, this is interesting stuff. Like,
Mhm.
what's next for you?
So after that happened, well, when I first started college, I was actually an undecided major. I had
Mm,
no idea what I wanted to do. After I took the intro to psych class and I recognized that I loved it, it kind of pushed me in that direction. And then I had to figure out, if I do practice psychology, what exactly am I going to be doing? Will it be therapy, testing, a mix, or whatever it was? And in the process of going through graduate school and, internship and all of those different things, I actually felt like it helped me to grow in terms of getting in touch with my emotions, specifically because I had a supervisor who picked up on the fact that I was very, I guess I would say, emotionally controlled.
mm,
And I actually think that's something that you do see in a lot of Caribbean cultures. You're kind of taught that you have to have it together, you can't show weakness, and so on and so forth. And I did not recognize that I really walked around with a huge chip on my shoulder until my supervisor kind of pointed out, you're very tense. And it was obvious to him that he could recognize that I was not used to talking about negative emotions at all. So I actually think even though he was my supervisor, it was almost therapeutic.
yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, how did that feel when he told you that? Did you feel any, um, you know,
I,
defensiveness or anything?
oh, definitely. I cried, and I'm talking like cried until I got a headache.
Wow.
And I remember I left, that particular the office that day, went home, had a massive headache, woke up the next day, and I was angry. It was literally like my supervisor was the wrong one.
Mm,
He's the one who said and did something that he was not going to do, he shouldn't have done, and I couldn't even stand to look at him. And I remember, this is kind of embarrassing now, but at the time there was a game that I used to play on my iPod, for those of us who are old enough to remember iPods, and there was a character in the game who shared the name of my supervisor. And I was so pissed I couldn't play the game that day. Like,
wow.
I really felt like he was to blame for me feeling the way that I was feeling. And I did not want to have that conversation. But
Mm,
thankfully, he did not give up. He recognized this is not something that she is used to. And he just kind of slowly chipped away, day by day, day by day, day by day. And he gave me space, which I think is huge. So it's not like as if he said these things and then immediately, went for the kill. It was more of like, I'm bringing something to your attention. How do you feel about that? Sit with that for a little bit. And the more he did that, I started to actually feel a little more calm. And then I could start to actually look back on my upbringing and recognizing what it was about that upbringing that made it hard for me to express my emotions.
Wow.
Hmm.
That sounds like such a crucial part of your mental health journey.
Oh, it definitely was. It
Yeah.
definitely was. I will never forget him for that because it was just, I just, it was like being ignorant. You don't
Yeah.
know until you know. And once you know, you can't go back. So that was huge.
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful reminder of a number of things. But one is like what we were talking about before
Hmm.
is the fact that we grow in connection with others, right?
Yes.
We can't do it alone, right?
No,
We're
no.
not in these silos. We need other perspectives. We need other insights, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And we also need to look back.
Yes. Oh, that's huge. I actually think we need to look back and we also need to know when to stop looking back. So I have had clients who have come in who, all they do is look back. That is
Hmm.
problematic too. So one of the things that I normally tell people is, in life, it's kind of like driving. If you're constantly looking in the rearview mirror, you'll crash. You have to look in the back, but then you eventually have to move forward. So it's important to reflect on the past so that we learn from it, but it is also important that we move forward.
Right. I mean, I agree. Totally agree. When do you
Mhm.
know? Like, when do you know when you need to look forward? Because I'll just speak for me.
Mhm.
I know that I've done a lot of looking back,
Mhm.
and have had to. Right. I'm in
Mhm.
EMDR therapy right now. I'm trying to unpack some childhood
Mhm.
trauma, things like that, and
Mhm.
trying to understand how it connects to my current, limiting beliefs and self hate
Mhm.
and things like that.
Mhm.
You know, being curious about that, but also being mindful of like, I can't sit in it always.
Mhm.
I guess just generally speaking, like, and I guess it's unique to everyone, right? But
Mhm.
like, when do you know? Like, when does one know? Like, oh, I need to look
Stop
forward.
looking
Like, when
back.
does it feel
Mhm.
okay to look forward?
So I think, especially if we're dealing with someone who has a trauma history, it is important to process the trauma because until you do that, you'll always be stuck back there. So, one of the things that can help people is to recognize if you do have a trauma history, it is okay to see, a therapist for therapy. It is okay to see a therapist for EMDR. If you need medication, it is okay to see a psychiatrist so that they can help you to process the trauma of what happened, so that you are not emotionally stuck there and can move forward. And then, with regards to people who may not necessarily have a trauma history, one of the things that I like to remind them, we can't go back in time. So I always tell my clients, if I had a time machine so that we could go back in time and fix that thing, I would say, let's go, and we would do it now. But since we don't have a time travel machine, we have to figure out, okay, this thing happened. I can't change it anymore. What can I do today to start bringing about a different outcome?
Hmm. That is so
Hmm.
profound because
Hmm.
um it strikes this chord in me that like I know that I have in the past
Hmm.
wanted to hold on to certain pieces of my childhood
Hmm.
because of feeling of loss, right? Because of feeling of
Yes.
missing out, right? Of wanting to
Yes.
like do everything in my power to change that, right? In some ways, but the
Hmm.
reality is that I have now and I have tomorrow, right?
Hmm.
The past I can't change,
Hmm.
but it's such a hard human thing to let go of.
It is. It's very hard to let go of. And I like the point that you brought up with regards to, certain things in your childhood that you would like to change. I have had so many clients over the years, and this is something that I think is very sad, but I'm seeing trauma so often. And one of the things that I've had to tell my clients is it's okay to grieve the childhood that you did not have.
Hmm.
It's okay to grieve that your parents weren't there for you. It's okay to grieve that your parent was an alcoholic or a drug user. It is okay to grieve that your innocence was taken because you were introduced to sex too early. In order for you to process the trauma, you have to actually recognize something bad or something wrong happened to me. And it is okay for me to mourn for that young child. Maybe you don't have the relationship you'd like to have with your mom or your dad or your sibling. Maybe you feel all alone. It is okay to grieve that. Then, after you have grieved that, you're going to work with a therapist or a qualified clinician to work through that, the emotions attached to that, the limiting beliefs or the cognitive distortions attached to that, the negative core beliefs that you hold about yourself, about the world, and about your future. Once you do those things, it frees you up to actually start to ask yourself, what can I do today to give myself a better and a brighter life?
Hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
How does the ACE studies, does that play a role in the work you do now?
In the work that I do now, not so much. However, I remember that my dissertation, it actually looked at cardiovascular reactivity among women with PTSD. And one of the things that I found is overwhelmingly, when I have someone walk into my office who does have, difficulties with chronic depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth, they do have that history of numerous adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah.
So it's not like as if it's just one thing, it's trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. So, for example, I might have someone who was abused, and when they told their parent, the parent blamed them. Or I
Hmm.
might have someone who was abused and they told their parents, and because the parent is in, let's say, for example, Caribbean culture, they say, let's just not talk about it. I'll keep him away from him. You never have to see him anymore, but let's just pretend like this never happened. All of those things, compile together, and they have a major negative impact on one's mental health.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
I've been reading The Deepest Well
Hmm.
by Nadine Burke Harris, and
Hmm.
it's hard. It's hard to read. It's hard to get through
Hmm.
because of that connection between
Yes.
adverse childhood experiences and like,
Hmm.
how many you have versus like how it's connected to, like
Hmm.
substance abuse and depression and
Yes.
suicidality and all these
Yes.
things. It's tough, man.
It is tough, and that's actually one of the things that I'll tell people that I've worked with. I've had people who came in with substance use issues, chronic depression, and anxiety, and part of what I had to do with them is to normalize and help them understand your substance use played a role. It is a coping strategy. Is it necessarily the healthiest? No, but it is a form of self-medicating.
Hmm.
So once I reframe it in that way, they recognize it's not that I'm a bad person. It's not that I'm a screw up. It's not that I'm just, someone who's addicted to substances. It puts into perspective when you have adverse childhood experiences, it's like you're a train on a track that derails. So when you have derailed, you are going to see other issues that pop up because of that. Normalizing that and recognizing, you know what? My drug use, my substance use, it played a role. It was a crutch for me. It helped me to get through some really dark spots in my life. And then saying to them, but you know what? We are going to replace this crutch with an even healthier one. So
Hmm.
that way there is less guilt and shame attached to it. the recognition that, this is how you are trying to deal with, the physical trauma, sexual trauma, the psychological neglect, the emotional abandonment, and then teaching them more positive coping skills that they can use to address the negative symptoms as they pop up.
Do you think that as a culture,
Hmm.
we are getting more, or let me reframe that. Do you
Hmm.
think as a culture we are reducing stigma around mental health?
I do think that there has been a lot of positive change made in our culture. I think, however, there's still more work to be done. And I think it starts with us feeling comfortable to not just talk about our feelings, but to actually admit if we have sought mental health help before.
Mm,
So I think that sometimes what we tend to do is we're going through a tough time and we don't tell anyone, either out of guilt, out of shame, not wanting to be perceived as weak or helpless. And what oftentimes happens is the people around us are going through the same or similar things, but since no one is talking about it, we all think we're the only ones. So I
yeah.
remember, for example, I had a client who, he and his father just never really got along. He came in for therapy, saw me, was able to address his depression, and he finally opened up to his dad and said, "You know what? This is what I've been dealing with." At which point his dad said, "I had no idea. I dealt with that too, and I was taking medication." And he was like, "What?" He had no idea that his dad had a similar struggle because both of them were thinking, I'm the only one going through this. I don't want to be perceived as weak, so I'm not going to tell anyone. But there
Yeah.
is strength in actually recognizing you're not the only person going through this. You are human, so what you're experiencing is normal, and talking about it helps to normalize it and takes away some of the shame attached to it.
Yeah. Do you find it that it's even sort of harder to admit when you identify as male or
Hmm.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would actually say most of my clients are usually female. And when a guy comes in, it's oftentimes because he feels like he's at his wits' end or
Mm,
he doesn't want to have to open up to the women in his life. So I do think that being male plays a role. I also think culture plays a huge role. So there are a lot of people, not just men, men from specific cultures. So, for example, Caribbean culture, Hispanic or Latino culture. There is this concept of what it means to be a man. You have to be strong, you can't show emotion, you can't show fear, and so on and so forth. So, it can be very difficult to get that kind of person through the door, which
mm.
is why I think that it's so important for us to have conversations like this and also work on continuing to destigmatize mental health.
Yeah, indeed. It makes me immensely sad, Diona, to think
Hmm.
about um, a man out there struggling and feeling that he has to be this beacon of strength, right?
Hmm.
And it feel like I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm in this quote unquote enlightened place where I've never felt that. I've like maybe
Hmm.
been I've missed that,
Hmm.
because I grew up with a father who I didn't want to aspire to. So maybe like that was
Hmm.
part of it. But it it makes me immensely sad that men are taking that on.
Yeah, and it's not just that men are taking it on, it's the socialization too. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that you and maybe some of your listeners have witnessed, a young boy crying, and then we tell them, boys don't cry. Wipe those tears, get up. We kind of socialize boys to think that to be a man, you have to be stoic. You can't express emotion. If you express emotion or if you're sensitive, then you're weak. So guys internalize that message, they carry it on into adulthood, and it can make it very difficult for them to get in touch with their feelings and their emotions because they don't want to be looked down upon, they don't want to feel weak. So it can be a struggle. It can be
Yeah.
a hard conversation to have.
So I'm going to talk to the listeners for a
Hmm.
second. Listeners, if men are listening, just a reminder: your feelings are powerful, and you
Yeah.
don't have to be this beacon of strength. You can feel, you can cry. Like, these are human things that make you stronger, that make you available to tap into this enrichment that comes with that
Hmm.
curiosity and that
Hmm.
um, breadth of human experience in
Hmm.
colors and all that stuff. And for the women listening, and if you're in relationships with men, or men in relationships with men, regardless, talk to the men in your life. Talk to them, give them safe spaces to feel, ask them questions, make it feel safe for them. Because
Hmm.
you know, I, suicide is still a huge deal, right? And among
Yes.
men, right?
Yes.
Men of my age, right?
Hmm.
In their 30s and 40s, like it's scary. I don't want to see any more people die.
Hmm. It is. It is a huge concern. And when it comes to what you said, where you told the women to actually give their men permission to feel, I think that that's huge. Because a lot of times what's going on is a guy's pride and ego is, personally affected when they feel like they are expressing emotions. It makes them feel less manly or less masculine. But if the person who is your partner in life, your significant other, is actually saying this is okay, it frees you up to just be and to just exist and have those feelings. And then I would add, even though a lot of times we kind of pit having emotions or expressing emotions versus being strong, I would actually say it takes a lot of strength to actually acknowledge our emotions, express them, and then work on addressing, the sources of the negative emotions.
Yeah.
So what often happens, especially in the case of suicide, people are going through so many stressors, but they're not talking about it. So they walk that road completely alone. So I always tell people, if you're suicidal, oftentimes it is because you are living a life you don't want to live. So it's not necessarily about just wanting to be dead. It's about not wanting to live this current life. And that is why it is important to have these conversations, to talk about the depression, the sadness, the anger, the anxiety, the guilt, the shame, the fear, whatever else it is, so that you actually recognize my emotions serve a purpose. I
Yeah.
am not feeling this way for no reason. I'm feeling this way because something is going on either internally or externally that is not working for me. And it is okay for me to talk about it, to get help so that I can change my life for the better.
Yeah. And I do think it's important to also add that intersectionality plays a role here, right? There's
Hmm.
so much gray and complexity to this. Like, we were talking from like maybe a heteronormative
Hmm.
perspective, but intersectionally, like, we're talking about people who are transgender, right? And people
Hmm.
who are people of color. Like, there's all these layers of
Hmm.
oppression, these layers of cultural baggage that
Hmm.
make us feel like we can't come out because or we can't talk about these things because it's unsafe for these various lenses that we put on ourselves or society has put on us, right?
Hmm.
And so recognizing that complexity is important as well.
Yeah, recognizing the complexity is important. And I would also add, if one of your listeners does decide to seek therapy, you want to find a therapist who is competent in terms of addressing these issues.
Hmm.
So you want to find someone who has done the research, who has done the work, who has looked into intersectionality, sexuality, race, and all of these other issues and is trying to learn. You never want to be in therapy with a therapist who is not striving to learn, who wants you to be the teacher You want to see that they actually care and they are enriching themselves so that they can provide you with the best therapeutic experience.
Hmm.
So that's something we all need to do, but especially if you're looking for a therapist, you want to see that that person is culturally competent, competent in terms of diversity, and that this is not something that they're doing because they have to do it, but because they want to do it.
Right.
Mhm.
So, Dyona, you mentioned before that faith is an
Mhm.
important part of your life and your
Yes.
anchor, right?
Mhm.
How does that piece of your person play a role in the sort of psychology? How do those two intertwine?
So I would say the main way that it intertwines is it actually affects my beliefs, not only about myself, but about the world around me and about my future. So, as I mentioned earlier, I am Christian. And one of the things that my parents always taught me was not only the power of prayer, but the power of faith. And when I talk about faith, I'm talking about believing even if you don't necessarily see what you are believing right away. So, for example, I can remember times where I was under a lot of stress and I was very anxious. The old Diona would have had negative thoughts that would have taken her down an emotional roller coaster. Whereas as a Christian, what I'll do is I'll actually change the way that I think about the situation. So, for example, saying to myself, you know what, even though I'm going through a tough time, I know that God is with me. I know that He is going to help me address whatever stressor comes my way. That is empowering for me because now I recognize I'm not alone. There is no need to catastrophize and assume that the worst is going to happen because I know that I have God on my side and He is for me.
Hmm.
So when it comes to, humans, I said it earlier, humans are not perfect. They do mess up. They do say things to hurt, offend, and so on and so forth. In my relationship with God, even though there may have been things that have disappointed me, I've never felt that God has abandoned me. I've always felt like He's there. He's listening to me when I'm down, when I'm crying, or whatever else it is. I don't get the question, what are you crying for? I just feel free to be me. And
Hmm.
I feel free to pray and actually talk to God about the fact that, today I woke up and I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to work. I don't want to see anyone. I don't want to talk to anyone. I just want to lay back, relax because I'm not feeling well today. And that's okay. So I think that that's one of the ways that my spirituality has helped me is it has enabled me to stop feeling the need to control myself and my emotions and to actually just change the way that I view the situation, change my belief, and then that in turn affects the way that I feel as well as my subsequent behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes
Mhm,
sense.
mhm,
You mentioned before earlier in this conversation that
mhm.
when you were growing up, and I think you mentioned your father was a pastor,
Yes,
and you
yes.
had come to him, and there was like a perspective of like just kind of give those feelings to God.
Mhm.
How does that play a role now? Is there that mindset still, or do you have a different sort of take on that?
Okay, so I would say it wasn't just my dad. I would say that my parents and even the church kind
Hmm.
of puts that, thought into you that you should just take it to God. In terms of how my perspective has changed, I now recognize that you can do both. So I always tell people who are interested in therapy, especially if they have a religious background, I'll say to them, therapy and your religion can go hand in hand. They are not mutually exclusive. So what I'll often do is I will talk to God about my feelings, whether positive or negative. I will trust that He'll help me get through a tough situation. And then with regards to the psychology, our thoughts impact the way that we feel. So sometimes, if something negative happens, I am immediately asking myself, what led me to feel anxious or angry or annoyed? How can I change that thought for the better? and I will immediately do that. So normally, if I am praying about something, it's something that's substantial, something that's heavy on my heart. But let's say, for example, something else happens. I call a friend and they don't return my phone call. I might feel some kind of way about it. But instead of just assuming the worst, I will say to myself, you know what? They're probably at work or they're probably away from their phone. So that way I don't let negative thoughts take me to a place that I don't want to go.
Hmm.
I always tell myself I have to be in the driver's seat. I can't allow my negative thoughts to be in the driver's seat.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate for a second here.
Hmm. Please do.
So I'm coming from a perspective of like I think I'm an agnostic person.
Okay.
I am open to certain things. Like
Hmm.
I'm fond of Buddhism and
Hmm.
fond of certain sects of religion.
Hmm.
Um, I I wonder if like I because the place I struggle sometimes is when religion is used in place of sort of the psychological care piece of
Hmm.
it. In my mind, the psychological piece of it is essential and needed. Like those
Hmm.
two can go hand in hand and they can be side each other, right? But the
Hmm.
psychological piece, if that one is ignored,
Hmm.
and you're just giving things to your God,
Hmm.
it seems to me that there is a certain ignoring that's happening.
Yes, I definitely think we have to keep in mind culture. So, for example, I have had people who have actually said to me, you don't need to talk to anyone, or you don't need a therapist, or you don't need this. All you need is Jesus. All you need to do is read your Bible more. All you need to do is pray more. I've even had people who heard that I was in psychology and said, psychology is not in the Bible. So that's not necessarily something that you should even be doing. So, when it comes to dealing with people with specific beliefs, especially when it comes to religion, the first thing you want to keep in mind, and this is whether the person is religious or irreligious, you don't immediately dismantle a person's belief or core beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
because the reality is they've held on to that for a long time. If you just immediately attack that core belief that they have in that way, you're going to turn them off to anything else that you have to say.
Sure.
So, for example, when a person says to me, well, I don't believe that you should do psychology or counseling because that's not in the Bible, I'll say to them, are airplanes in the Bible? Are computers in the Bible? Like, there are so many things that are not in the Bible, but we still use them. So, what I'll do is I'll kind of flip it back onto them and say, you believe in a God who is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, meaning he knows everything, he is everywhere, and he sees everything, right? And they'll say to me, yeah. And then I'll say to them, well, don't you believe it's possible that God is the one who has actually provided psychology, sociology, anthropology? Like he is the one who has actually put these people here for a specific reason, to address mental health needs, to
Mm.
address sociological or social justice needs, to address, the needs of humanity and humankind. So now it's not just that I'm saying, these things are mutually exclusive. I'm actually showing them this can still fit into your worldview of God and who he is. So
Yeah.
now you can't tell me, oh, you don't need therapy because you're a Christian and, Jesus can do everything. Yeah, that's great. But you have to look at it from the perspective of God is the one who could actually give knowledge to this therapist to help me see things in a way that I wouldn't necessarily see. Because for
Fascinating.
most
Yeah.
religions, God is spirit. You can't see or talk to him, back and forth like the two of us are doing now. So I'll say to them, God can talk through that person to address your specific needs. Once I do that, a lot of times you'll kind of see the light bulb go off where they're like, never thought of it that way. And then I'll use that as a segue to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, thank you for sharing that
Mhm.
clarification. I want to start wrapping it up, but I do have,
Mhm.
I think you mentioned maybe somewhere on your Instagram,
Mhm.
you mentioned hope, this idea of hope.
Yes. Yes.
What what does that mean to you? What does that word mean to you? Like when you think of that word, how does that feel? What comes to mind?
Mm. That is a very good question. I actually think so. Speaking for myself, I am naturally an optimistic skeptic. And I know that those two don't sound like they go together, but I am both optimistic, but I'm also the type of person who is skeptical. When I think about hope, it is me believing that no matter what happens, I can still make something good. Okay, when either it comes to my life, my relationships, my friendships, my job, or whatever it is me believing that even if right now I can't necessarily see the silver lining to the cloud, it's out there. So
Hmm.
I always, when I'm talking to people, whether it's my friends or family, or whether it's an actual client, I can always tell which people will actually move uh, in the positive direction by the amount of hope they have.
Hmm.
Hope is healing. And when I say hope is healing, I'm not just talking, about psychobabble or mumbo jumbo. They've actually done research that has shown people who are more hopeful have better outcomes in terms of physiological health as well as psychological health. So when I talk about hope, it is me fostering in a person that just because things have always been this way doesn't mean it always will be this way. Just because you have a trauma history and now you have commitment issues doesn't mean it always has to be this way. There is always hope. There is always a chance that by you choosing to work on whatever issue you are struggling with, something good is going to happen. You just have to believe. So for me, my hope is tied in with my faith. So I said earlier, faith is believing before we see. So hope is all about trusting that even though right now the picture doesn't look the way that I thought it should look, I can still make something beautiful out of this.
Hmm. Don't you think though there needs to be like I mean this for me hope is an important element in my life for sure.
Hmm.
But it's also like it seems that there needs to be like a what am I bringing into my life? Like how am I changing my mindset? How am I
Hmm.
thinking in different perspectives to bring hope? Like what are the ingredients of that hope? Like and I need to be action oriented about it, right?
Hmm. Oh, yeah. I definitely think action plays a role. You don't want to be that person who you say that you're hopeful, but you're not actually doing anything to change the situation. So,
Right.
for example, I've had clients in the past who, they were trying to find a partner and they'll say to me, I'm hopeful that I'll eventually get a date. And when I ask them, what are you doing to actually make that happen? Nothing. I'm praying and I'm hoping, and I trust that the universe is going to bring a guy to me. And I'll say to them, the only guy you're going to meet is probably the UPS or the FedEx guy. But if you actually want to increase your chances of meeting someone, you have to put in the work. So hope is not a replacement for the work. Hope is trusting that in the process of doing, in the process of taking action, in the process of talking to a therapist, taking medication, confronting that family member, speaking to a friend, things are going to turn out well. Does things turning out well mean that they'll turn out perfectly? No. Is there a chance that you could talk to that family member who hurt you and they're not apologetic, or, they don't ask for forgiveness or whatever else it is? Yeah, that's a possibility. But recognizing, even in that moment, you having that conversation was huge. You addressing that toxicity will make a difference in terms of your future interactions, not only with that person, but with the other people who enter your life. So, hope is followed up with action. And that is what is going to be. It's kind of like an interaction that makes positive things happen for you.
Hmm.
Mhm,
Yeah, indeed. Well said.
mhm,
Well, Dyona, we always wrap up the show talking about empathy
mhm,
heroes. So these are folks in our lives who are just deeply empathetic. Could be people we know, could even be characters from books we love,
mhm,
what have you. I am going to go first to give you a moment to think about your empathy hero.
mhm.
My empathy hero this week is Chloe Owen, who I worked with this week to put out the first art collaborative piece for Feely Human, and it's an empathy for kids little zine
Oh, I love
with
that.
it's so adorable. It's
Mhm,
it's it's like 6 pages. It has a lesson on each page. It's so cute, and it was designed by Chloe, who is a local artist here. And I first met Chloe because I did an empathy workshop at her college, Chapman University, here in Southern California. She's a graphic design student and a very talented one. And her creating this piece and wanting to like collaborate with Feely Human and sell it in the
mhm.
shop, and it's just it sort of made my week. And a handful of people have already purchased them, and it just makes me
Wow.
very happy to think about like little kids sort of learning these concepts of empathy. So
Mhm.
Chloe Owen and the Empathy Kid zine are my empathy heroes this week.
Wow, I love that. I think
Yeah.
that's a wonderful initiative. And of course, I'm hoping that even more people will continue to support Chloe. That's awesome.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you. How about you?
Mhm. So, when it comes to Empathy Hero, I'm actually going to go with um, not someone that I know in terms of someone that I see or speak to on a regular basis. I would actually say, just based on my faith, that Jesus was one of the most empathic individuals who ever lived. And if we go and we actually read stories of the ways that he approached the people in his time with compassion and understanding, and not allowing other people to change the way that he responded, the judgmental religious leaders of their time who constantly pointed out what other people were doing wrong, but never looked at their own issues, I would say that Jesus would be my empathy hero, because he teaches us the correct way to address other people, to actually love our neighbor as ourselves, to not be so selfish and entitled, but to actually think of someone else. So I think that that's who I would choose.
Hmm. I mean, I am so surprised that it's been like 150 episodes of the show and no one has mentioned Jesus as an empathy hero. Because
Yeah, when you asked me the question,
yeah.
I was like, huh.
I agree. I mean, as someone who
Mhm,
has read the Bible and
mhm,
you know, Jesus as the person in my mind was,
mhm,
yeah, he helped the sex workers. He helped the poor.
mhm,
He
mhm.
was immensely humble and
Yes, all of the rejects of
yeah,
society that people turn their backs on. And
exactly.
I can't remember the specific verse, but there's a verse in the Bible that says Jesus looked on them and had compassion.
Mm,
And as a psychologist and therapist, that's something that I always keep close to my heart when I'm dealing with clients, who have trauma issues and, poor relationships with their family. That's what I feel. It's this compassion for what they've been through and their attempts to change it. And every time I think of that verse, I just feel empathy and compassion for my clients, and I think that's what helps me help them. So that to me is That's who he was.
I love it. And I'm so grateful that you have that relationship.
Mhm.
In my experience, it's not always that way. And,
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
people who call themselves Christians, and I maybe have a chip on my shoulder in some ways for that,
Mhm.
but it is very refreshing, and it gives me hope to think about,
Mhm.
you living that way, and you sort of,
Mhm.
aspiring to live more like how Jesus was. Like that's
Yeah.
great. Very grateful.
Yeah. Thank you so
Awesome.
much for saying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Mhm.
Well, Dyona, where can the Feely humans out there learn more about the work you're doing and connect with you?
So they can connect with me on my Instagram. It's at Dr. Dyona. So that's at DRDYONA. And if they go on my Instagram, they'll see a link to my website as well as to my YouTube. So they can follow me there as well.
And you have a show with your sister?
Yes, I do. It's under the Mental Health Sisters on YouTube. So, anyone who is listening, if you think that, based on what I said today, you would like to hear more, you can subscribe to our page and keep up with me and my sis.
Awesome. I think that's so cute. You two just very bright humans,
Yes.
just, sharing wisdom. It's awesome.
Definitely. We love it.
Awesome. Well, listeners, make sure to go connect with Dyona and subscribe to her YouTube channel. All those links will be in the show notes for this episode. Dyona, thank you so much for being a guest on Yumi Empathy.
Thank you so much for having me known. I appreciated it. I enjoyed, the conversation, the points that you brought up, and I'm hoping that so many people will be helped by your podcast.
Well, they will, because you were here and sharing your story and your wisdom. So thank you.
Thank you.
And to you listeners, as I always say, I'm here, you're here, we're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring pale blue dot. We have each other. It's you, me, empathy.